I'm constantly struck. Most of the immigration stories I do are from Canada, but I'm constantly struck by the expectation of perfection, like murderously hard work and constant gratitude. It's
Yes.
like it never goes away. It doesn't matter the generation, doesn't matter the country of origin, although non-white immigrants, non-Anglophone immigrants face much harder hurdles. But we just expect gratitude and perfection from everybody.
Yeah, it's really well said. It's so true. Yeah. And that's why you can see, that's why I say he was so smart in at 17 knowing that he had to create a little bit of a different narrative.
Did he ever say like where like he got that idea? Like was it watching something? It's incredibly savvy.
That's a good question. I should have asked him that. Yeah, I don't know. He's a smart kid. I don't know. I'm sure he'd seen other cases. Yeah.
He's seen this.
He has seen this. So we actually we had a great team at NFB and TVO who were the funders for this film, because I don't think you always get this in the documentary world. But we held the film for quite a while till he was ready to see it. As you can clearly see, I mean, he's having some pretty serious mental health issues at various times. And so he didn't want to see it for a long time. So we wanted to make sure he was prepared for it to come out. So we did. It was during COVID, unfortunately, but we watched it together online, and we recorded his response, and he was actually really. Again, we were going to work it into the film. It didn't work in, but he was really. He was really astute. He's like, some people will see this film and get it. Some people absolutely won't. And he sort of did a breakdown, which I think are all the reactions that have happened to some degree. But he gave permission, which again is a weird thing in journalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't, once someone tells a story, I think it would be a firing offense at the Star if I showed that story to, I'm looking at Star colleagues back in former, so like big nods back there. Yeah, you would get, that's a firing offense. You don't get editorial say. So this was another weird ethical dilemma, which makes documentary filmmaking a bit different from daily journalism, a lot different in some ways. I felt like he had to see it.
And if he'd said no, you just would have killed it?
We didn't get there, and I don't know what would have happened. Thankfully we didn't get there. But that we would have done something. I mean, if there were reasons that were ethical that we couldn't do it, or if it was going to impact him to the point that this was going to harm him, then there's the film's not that important that it's if it was gonna harm him. But he said it was okay to go out, and but he hasn't come for the screenings. I mean, we wanted him to be here in Toronto, and he really doesn't want any. He really wants to move on, and it's kind of sad. We don't really talk. I mean, we still text once in a while, but we don't talk really the same. I think he's quite fairly said, every time he talks to me, he just thinks of the film and his past, and it's hard.
How's he doing?
He's actually back visiting in Mogadishu right now with his family. Yeah, so we went back. He was in Norway for a long time. He just went back recently. So he seems to be doing okay. Yeah.
Can he sponsor family to come to join him? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think he can actually apply for that in Norway. Yeah. Yeah. Originally, I'd hoped he was coming to Canada. I mean, that was when we first met. But Norway was just the fastest with offering him refuge. So
the image of him like on his hands and knees trying to pick up the pin was like, because it happens. You get people, you do an interview, and then they're like, okay, help me come to Canada, help me get my children. Like, yeah.
And so, and the setting of that too, I mean, it was at a time when it was still, the conflict was, it was after the worst of the war, but the conflict was still going on. So, the way the interview happened was, it was the only time actually I reported there, and I actually was sort of quote unquote embedded because you couldn't get around town any other way. So I'm in a flak jacket, helmet. I've just driven in with African Union forces, who were like the peacekeeping force at the time. Excuse me. And, it's near curfew. We drive in these big tanks that are called Caspirs. They're these big monster trucks. And they're like, you have 10 minutes. What? And we pushed it to like 90 minutes or whatever I had. But they're like, we're leaving you here. We got like screaming at me. This is the environment. This poor kid's trying to tell me a story. We're taking a picture. Yeah. And so the last image I have is I'm literally being dragged out and running out. Is he's asked for the pin on my bag, like a Canadian pin. I give it to him and he drops it. And I'm just like, this is just, yeah, it really, it's a terrible, gross feeling. And you feel the real divide and this gross privilege for being able to run out of there. Yeah.
Is it possible for us to do stories, especially in places where we're the foreign journalists, that aren't extractive?
I like to hope so. I mean, I think now journalism has opened up in such a way, mainly for good, in the last like 10 to 15 years, where there's just so much more local reporting, which and so I think what I hope to see happen more and more is still partnerships. I mean, you still need sort of sometimes the experience, but there's a great journalist in the UK, Mary Harper, who's done a lot in Somalia, and she started a program now for local female journalists, and they're like freelancing out. So I think once you get a more robust, Somalia is a tough country in terms of independent journalism. There's a lot of countries that are tough, but it's particularly hard there. But I think the more and more you get that, then you're just going to get stories that feel less extractive, of course. Yeah.
I mean, I realized I said that. I didn't want to insinuate that your reporting had.
No.
But I just like, it's a fear of mine that I just
Of course, that was the whole discomfort with this story and what it made you feel. And I mean, it was always something you think of. Of course it is when you go into a country and you just by way of the fact that you're going in and being able to leave when local journalists can't, and you have the money to pay for protection, and there's just a total gap. So you're always seeing stories through that lens. And it's kind of just inevitable in some places at that time. But I think that has started to change in ways. But even having said that, though, I mean, it's as you know, like it's almost, you never work in countries without the support of local journalists anyway. I mean, you work in partnership. And a lot of times in some of the countries I would work in, we would partner, and the Star was good about offering to co-byline, so but a lot of times the journalists wouldn't want that because again, you get, if it's critical, you get to leave, and they don't.
Yeah.